with the beautiful flying bird lady that was his G-Ride moments ago, was now seconds away from striking Rolanda. The dagger she held in her hands, poised to plunge downwards, while Rolanda was still holding her away by the top of her head. His feet dangled in the air, sensing the danger as if it were a physical presence. Rolanda, with the hand that was intended to run Wave through, diverted its path in an up-and-down circular, backward karate chop motion, never taking her eyes off her target. Just as the chop was about to connect with the top of the birdwoman's head, her motion was stopped. A rough, hot sensation followed by a jerking back motion as she was sent reeling. A powerful force had intervened. The birdwoman was brought down to the ground, the body collar of her tank top shirt gripped by another wolfwoman. This new wolfwoman had fur the color of a cloud on a sunny day around her legs and the top of her head, and her eyes were as green as money. Staring face to face with the downed bird lady, she spat, "Suck your ball! Not allowed over here." With a fluid motion, she sent the bird lady spinning off into the crowd of other women with black wings. These bird women hissed, claws extending from their hands, as other wolf girls closed ranks in front of the cloudy-haired wolf girl. It was only then that Rolanda broke her attention from Wave, who did a spinning motion in the background as her head looked back to face the other wolf comrade, who she called her name, Seraphine. "Why don't you mind your business while I do a night's work?" she asked, a slight twitch running across her face. The cloudy-haired wolf woman, Seraphine, brought her hands up to her mouth with a slight gasp. "Not you too, Rolanda?" "Not me. What?" Rolanda spat back, venom in her voice. "You know what? The condition," Seraphine retorted. Rolanda, in an almost annoyed tone, turned back to finish Wave off, as she had intended before being so rudely interrupted. "There's no condition with me, only what I must do," she declared. Surprise registered across Seraphine's face as she saw that Rolanda was no longer holding Wave. Her hand was outstretched, holding only air. She scanned the horizon, locating him standing right next to Princess Rose, chatting it up as if Rolanda wasn't even there. With a high-pitched shriek, she yelled, "You dirty ape!" The slight twitch from earlier became more pronounced. Princess Rose, with a look of panic on her face, yelled at Rolanda, "I command you to stop!" Seraphine stepped in front of all of them, her voice firm. "Rolanda, you're sworn to serve, just like me. If you continue this, I will put you down." "The ape dies, that's all," Rolanda responded, the slight sound of electricity popping in the distance. Both their bodies began to irradiate energy, the only difference being the sight you with each of their energies glow. Then something extraordinary began to happen. A light seemed to ooze from the top of Rolanda's head, rising into the air and collecting like a fluid. This fluid emanated a light blue color that pulsated rhythmically. The light intensified, casting its glow down like a spotlight that covered Rolanda's whole body, and then spread out 100 feet in each direction, making it seem like she was shrouded on all sides by an ethereal luminescence. Rolanda fell to all fours, and a sound like wood popping in a fire emanated from her body as it began to morph and grow in size. The light that had enveloped her began to shrink inward, contracting as Rolanda's form expanded. The transformation was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. She grew larger and larger, her lupine features becoming more pronounced. Fur sprouted across her body, thickening and darkening. Her limbs elongated, muscles bulging beneath her skin. Her face contorted, her jaw extending into a formidable snout filled with razor-sharp teeth. A low growl rumbled in her chest, growing louder with each passing moment. The light continued to recede, concentrating around Rolanda's growing form. The air crackled with energy, the scent of ozone thick in the air. The other wolf women and bird women watched in stunned silence, their earlier animosity forgotten in the face of this incredible display of power. When the transformation was complete, Rolanda stood as a towering werewolf, the size of a 7-story building. Her eyes glowed with an eerie blue light. and her fangs were bared in a silent snarl. The light that had surrounded her was now gone, leaving only the imposing figure of the giant werewolf in its wake. The sheer power emanating from her was palpable. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and the air vibrated with her presence. She was a force of nature, a creature of myth and legend brought to life. This was the true form of the wolf woman, Rolanda, a being of immense power and terrifying beauty. This monumental shift in power dynamic had everyone present on edge. Fear, awe, and uncertainty hung heavy in the air. The bird women watched in stunned silence, their earlier animosity forgotten in the face of this incredible display of power. When the transformation was complete, Rolanda stood as a towering werewolf, the size of a 7-story building. Her eyes glowed with an eerie blue light, and her fangs were bared in a silent snarl. The light that had surrounded her was now gone, leaving only the imposing figure of the giant werewolf in its wake. The sheer power emanating from her was palpable. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and the air vibrated with her presence. She was a force of nature, a creature of myth and legend brought to life. This was the true form of the wolf woman, Rolanda, a being of immense power and terrifying beauty. This monumental shift in power dynamic had everyone present on edge. Fear, awe, and uncertainty hung heavy in the air. The bird women, once aggressive, now seemed hesitant, their hisses and extended claws less threatening in the presence of the colossal werewolf. The other wolf women, too, were visibly affected, their expressions a mixture of shock and apprehension. Even Seraphine, who had stood so boldly against Rolanda moments before, seemed to shrink in the face of this transformation. Her green eyes, once filled with defiance, now reflected a deep unease. The balance of power had shifted dramatically, and no one knew what Rolanda's next move would be. In the midst of this tense atmosphere, Wave, seemingly unaffected by the transformation, was still listening to Rose's soft sobs. Her distress seemed to pierce through the chaos, reaching him on a deeper level. Her tears, each one a tiny testament to her fear and vulnerability, tugged at something within him. Seeing the panic in Rose's eyes, the way her body trembled with each sob, ignited a spark within Wave. It was a sense of protectiveness, a primal urge to shield her from the turmoil surrounding them. He realized he couldn't stand idly by while she suffered, regardless of the oaths and allegiances that bound others. A surge of determination coursed through Wave. He had to act, not as a knight or a pawn in someone else's game, but as a protector, a guardian for the one who needed him most. In that moment, a decision was made, a choice that would set him on a new, uncharted path. Interrupting the stare-down between the two wolf women, his voice cut through the tension. "Seraphine," he said, addressing her directly. The slight look of annoyance on her face as he used her name so casually was evident, but he pressed on. "Do what you were sworn to do. Protect the queen. I can protect myself." As if on cue, the bag that was still in Sakura's room, containing his 2 weapons, vanished and reappeared, now slung across Wave's back. The 2 hooked moon crescent swords, blacker than phantom black, materialized in his hands. They were in his hands literally because, where there were supposed to be handles, hand tools, there was only an upside-down pyramid-shaped thing underneath the blades with finger holes that placed themselves on his hands as if they had their own will. The moment he closed his hands around them, blood began to flow from the handles, traveling all the way up to the tips of the hooked blades. Then, after reaching the top, the wolf girls began covering their ears because a maniacal laughter, the sound of 2 little girls about to play the most exciting game of their lives, began to ring out. The sound lasted for 10 seconds before dying off, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. While listening to Rose cry, he made a decision. As the swords, Chaos, and UOTMH sang their deadly song. Wave stood off in the distance, his face contorted in a mixture of discomfort and disgust, listening to Rolanda's agonizing screams as her body rearranged itself. She was now a monstrous wolf, as tall as a small skyscraper and as wide as a yellow school bus. Rolanda made the first move, charging forward with her massive frame, shaking the ground with each step. She seemed to close the distance in mere nanoseconds. Wave, with no time to think, went into his flow state of war, a state of pure instinct. He amusingly thought to himself that it wasn't like he had ever fought a skyscraper-sized enemy before, so his past experiences wouldn't help him here. His instincts were all he had, and they had never led him astray. His body moved on its own, staying near to the massive body, but away from the deadly head. When her massive form threatened to crush him, he plunged his two blades into her, sharing searing hot pain throughout her body. This dance continued for a while, she trying to bite him, he trying to avoid being bitten. Finally, he looked into her eyes firmly. She briefly paused her intent to rip off his head and stared back, waiting for his next words. "I'm starting to get bored," Wave declared, a hint of mockery in his voice. Then, showcasing his incredible speed, he moved in just as she opened her jaws, running downwards. He hopped to the right a few inches, placing his two swords underneath him, bending to make a makeshift ramp. Straddling the swords, he used them as a spring, launching himself high enough to grab onto the fur just below her neck. He climbed and pulled himself up until he was sitting atop her back. She immediately began to buck, roll, and do everything possible to dislodge him. As Wave finally let go and seemed to glide to the floor, she retaliated with all her strength, swiping with her right paw. If it were to hit him, it would have torn off half his body at the torso, leaving only his kneecap standing. Everything else would have been obliterated into a gruesome mess on the bottom of her paw. But instead, he caught the paw in his arms, offering no resistance, letting his body absorb the force. He was flung back with tremendous momentum, but the force she generated backfired. He held tightly to her massive right paw, his two hook swords firmly embedded. The inertia caused by the force being returned to her body made her weight shift, pulling her in the same direction until she was off her feet and sliding on her side. Wave countered her attack with a straight, full-body run-through, intending to tear through her midsection and ravage her insides. And not in that good way. But as he was just steps away, blades raised, ready to begin, he saw something that made him slide, attempting to halt his motion. He managed to stop just inches away from the massive wolf, who was now starting to rise. Wave didn't have time to process what he had just seen before Rolanda was on him again, her eyes wide and inflamed with rage. As he turned his back to her, preparing to flee, he smacked his teeth in frustration. This continued for at least 30 more minutes, her attacking him with the ferocity of a tiger taking down its prey, and Wave remaining elusive, almost as if toying with her. Every slash, he would just barely escape the range. Every bite, he would be on the other side, giving her a hard slap on the nose after she missed. However, with each failed strike, her speed increased. It became apparent that Wave was expending more effort to evade being hit. The wolf girl was starting to realize the same. She could taste his blood now. It was only a matter of time. Seraphin and everyone else watching noticed the shift in the battle. Wave didn't brandish his moon crescent-hooked swords as much, almost as if he had no intention of using them. And, almost as if to confirm it, with a swift spin, he holstered the two jet-black hooked swords, commanding them to go away with a faint whisper. "Who do you really love?" he asked, a question directed at someone no one else could see. A person who never answered his question, the general. There was no one he loved more than the general. His devotion to her was absolute, a guiding star in his life. She was the woman he couldn't save, a fact that haunted him to this day. He remembered the day he met her. She was different from his teacher, a commander of a born-to-lose Congo rebel army. The general was a 5'6" woman with a slender, muscular body, army fatigue pants that stopped at her knees, and a button-up army fatigue shirt. Her rare grayish-blue eyes contrasted with her dark brown skin, and her curly hair sat under an army fatigue brim hat. She was a vision of strength and authority. From that moment on, he dedicated himself to her cause, following her commands without question, but he ultimately failed to save her. Every night when he fell asleep, and sometimes when he was awake, she would come in his dreams, issuing various commands that mostly boiled down to kill or spare. It seemed she disapproved of him this time. He watched her standing there, shaking her head no. He was failing to bring out Rolanda's humanity, failing to follow the general's unspoken guidance. He was torn between his instincts and his devotion to the woman who had shaped his life, the woman he couldn't save. As the battle raged on, Wave found himself increasingly drawn into his own thoughts. He remembered the countless battles he had fought, the lives he had taken, and the sacrifices he had made, all in the name of the general. Was it all worth it? Was he truly making a difference? Or was he just a pawn in a larger game? The general's disapproval weighed heavily on him, and he wondered if he was losing his way. The wolf girl, sensing Wave's inner turmoil, pressed her attack with renewed vigor. She lunged at him, her jaws snapping shut just inches from his face. Wave, lost in his thoughts, barely managed to dodge the attack. He stumbled backward, his eyes still fixed on the ethereal figure of the general. He knew he had to make a choice, and he had to make it soon. This battle was not about defeating Rolanda, but about staying true to the general's ideals, the ideals of the woman he couldn't save. As Rolanda closed in for the kill, Wave finally snapped out of his reverie. He looked into the wolf girl's eyes, not with the intention to fight, but with a silent plea. He was choosing the general's path, even if it meant his own demise. He raised his arms to his sides, a gesture of surrender, and said, "This is what the general would have wanted." Rolanda's jaws clamped down on him, biting him through the center and lifting him into the air. The 7-story-high wolf stood there, with Wave held firmly between her teeth, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Suddenly, Sakura, the vampire queen, appeared, her presence sending a wave of fear through the enormous wolf. Sakura unleashed a powerful punch, sending the wolf girl flying a mile away. Wave fell from the wolf's grasp, plummeting towards the ground. As he fell, a section of the pearlescent black floor panel beneath him seemed to ripple like liquid moonlight. It shifted and flowed, forming a concave, pod-shaped structure that rose to meet Wave's falling form. The pod was a deep crimson, pulsating with a soft, inner light. Intricate, vein-like patterns of darker red coursed through its surface, resembling a giant, otherworldly heart. As Wave made contact, the pod enveloped him in its viscous, blood-red fluid. The pod then glowed with an intense, internal red light before smoothly retracting back into the floor, the pearlescent black surface seamlessly closing over it as if it had never been there. The pod, with Wave inside, traveled beneath the floor, leaving a trail of fading red light in its wake. Then Wave awoke in a mysterious dreamlike environment, unsure of where he was or what had just happened. The last thing he remembered was the general's disappointed face, the woman he couldn't save, and the feeling of choosing her path above all else. Warch. Sakura was beating the crap out of Rolanda. With a feral snarl that echoed through the cavernous space, Sakura, a vision of predatory grace despite her vampiric nature, held the now shrinking werewolf, Rolanda, aloft. Her grip tightened around Rolanda's throat, her crimson eyes blazing with a terrifying intensity. Rolanda, who just moments ago had been a towering beast of muscle and fur, was rapidly reverting to her smaller, human form. Her whimpers of pain a stark contrast to the earlier roars that had shaken the very foundations of the chamber. Sakura's face contorted into a mask of barely controlled fury, a silent promise of imminent dismemberment etched in every line. A sudden cacophony of sound, like 1,000 talons scraping against stone, ripped through the tense silence. Sakura's head snapped toward the source, her gaze sweeping over the sight that awaited her. 500 wolf girls, each a monstrous behemoth the size of skyscrapers and houses, were thundering towards her position. Their massive paws pounded the ground, creating tremors that threatened to collapse the entire structure. They were a terrifying tide of fur and fangs, a canine army determined to rescue their leader. The sheer scale of the approaching horde was enough to make even the most seasoned warrior falter. But Sakura was no ordinary warrior. She was an ancient vampire, a creature of immense power and unwavering resolve. The Clifford the Big Red Dog Army, as Sakura mentally dubbed them, immediately screeched to a halt when she focused her attention on them, her gaze like a physical force. As if on cue, slits began to appear in the floor, silently sliding open to reveal an arsenal of weaponry. Gatling gun-looking weapons, each equipped with an ominous infrared beam, sprung up, one for every hostile wolf girl. The weapons hummed with barely contained energy, their barrels rotating slowly, tracking the movements of the now hesitant wolf pack. A predatory smile, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, stretched across Sakura's lips. "Each one of you gets a silver one, babies," she purred, her voice dripping with a menacing sweetness. The threat hung heavy in the air, a palpable wave of dread washing over the wolf girls. The infrared beams danced across their fur, a chilling reminder of the firepower aimed directly at them. Sakura turned her attention back to Rolanda, who was now fully human, her eyes wide with terror. "As for you, Rose," she said, addressing the wolf princess, who had been watching from a safe distance. A mixture of fear and fury etched on her face. "Rolanda will have to be quarantined. It's obvious she can't control herself. The condition has her. But..." Sakura's voice hardened, the playful tone replaced by an implacable steel. "If she kills him, she'll be joining him shortly after. Just like Janice when she murdered the last champion," Sakura added, with a slight clarification. "And before you ask, Janice was a succubus." The weight of Sakura's words, like a physical blow, sent a ripple of fear through the assembled wolf girls. They knew the story of Janice and the brutal consequences that followed. The memory served as a potent deterrent, a stark reminder of Sakura's power and her absolute refusal to tolerate any challenge to her rule. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the low hum of the Gatling guns. The wolf girls stood frozen, their earlier bloodlust replaced by a profound sense of dread. They knew that any attempt to intervene would result in their immediate and utter annihilation. Rolanda, caught in Sakura's iron grip, could only whimper, her fate hanging precariously in the balance. Sakura's gaze swept over the terrified wolf pack, her crimson eyes burning with an ancient power. She was the apex predator, the ultimate authority in this realm. Her will was law, her word absolute. The wolf girls, for all their size and ferocity, were nothing more than prey in her eyes. The standoff continued, a silent battle of wills between the vampire queen and the wolf pack. Sakura's grip on Rolanda never wavered, a constant reminder of her power. The Gatling guns remained trained on the wolf girls, their silent threat a potent deterrent. The fate of Rolanda, and perhaps the entire wolf pack, hung in the balance, suspended in this tense, volatile moment. The tension was almost unbearable. Each passing second felt like an eternity. Sakura's grip tightened ever so slightly on Rolanda's throat, causing the werewolf to gasp for breath. The wolf girls watched in horror, their instincts screaming at them to intervene, but their fear of Sakura's wrath keeping them rooted to the spot. Finally, breaking the strained silence, Sakura declared, "I'm taking Rolanda to be quarantined." Turning to the Wolf Queen, Rose, she added, "And I will see you at the game, Rose." Then Wave opened his eyes, slowly straining to take in his surroundings. The room had an outer worldly glow about it. Before him, a girl bent over, her bosom spilling out of a faded, half-buttoned army fatigue shirt. Her short army fatigue pants, stopping just above the knee, exposing slender, dark brown legs. She was painting her toenails a bright crimson red, her desert sky grayish-blue eyes fixed on Wave. Her lips were as red as a rose, her dark brown skin soft, almost bubbly, if it wasn't for her focused gaze. Her hair, a moderate afro, was tucked under an army fatigue-brimmed hat. Wave became aware of robots, some big, some tiny, in chrome outer shells, that looked like mobile 3D printers with spider legs, fixing and mending his wounds and his punctured lungs. The general look-alike stated, "All from getting beat up." Wave chimed in, "I did not get beat up. I just decided not to fight. None of this would have happened if I wasn't kidnapped on board this dirty spaceship." The general's look-alike finally looked up from painting her toenails crimson red, a sly expression playing across her face. "It's your own fault for listening to a psychopathic figment of your imagination who may be only trying to get you killed," she said. And add, "Or you calling me dirty? Try staying clean with a whole bunch of canines and featherbird flu-carrying bee-cos inside of you." "Inside?" Wave repeated groggily. "So you're a robot?" he continued. She stood and approached him, gliding in a smooth, fluid motion. Her hand touched his chest, then slid down, taking a wet, soft, firm grip on his manhood. Wave let out a low, deep moan. In the back of his mind, he wished the general had done this in real life. "Don't confuse me, boy. You think a robot feels like this?" she said, stroking him with both hands. "Why would you go so crazy running around, almost getting yourself killed to go back to a place you begged to be saved from?" He opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off with a kiss on his lips. "Before you ask another stupid question, and while I still have you here with me, I should tell you why you can still remember. I've been connected to you longer than you can ever imagine. We lose ourselves and find ourselves right back here, in each other's arms. When one runs, the other chases. When one is lost, the other finds, just like that, over and over again. Our passion repeats and never gets old." Wave's eyes grew heavy. Drifting off to sleep, he asked her name. She replied, "It's been too long between us for names to even matter to the you that's right now. Just call me the general." He felt a strange pull, a tugging sensation, as if he were being drawn through a dark tunnel. Images flickered before his closed eyes. The wolf girl's snarling face, the sterile white of the infirmary, the general's captivating gaze. He tried to hold on to the feeling of her touch, the warmth of her kiss, but it was fading, slipping away like sand through his fingers. He felt himself falling, tumbling through a void, the echoes of her voice growing fainter with each passing moment. Then, a sharp, jarring sensation, like ice water being thrown over him. He gasped, his eyes snapping open. He was no longer in the soft, heart-shaped bed, no longer in the general's embrace. He was suspended, chained, above a poker table. The air was thick with the scent of old money and something else. Something metallic and